Hi everyone. Now that you've watched my new intro, I have something for you today. For such a time as this. Esther chapter 4 verses 13 and 14. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." Today's sermon title comes from the Old Testament book of Esther. Esther was brought into the Persian king's household as one of his many wives, not a situation a young Jewish woman had any control over. Once she reached the palace, her life was governed there by elaborate rules and regulations set forth by the king. She had a clearly defined place, and she knew she'd be in big trouble with the king if she ever stepped out of line. Yet Mordecai, the uncle who had raised Esther, challenged her when her people were facing grave danger to take a tremendous risk in order to save them. He said, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter, but you and your family's house will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this." Who knows? Perhaps you too have come to royal dignity for such a time as this. A rallying cry for Mordecai and Esther. It's a phrase that has resonated with countless people of faith since that time too. Who knows? Perhaps you have come into the kingdom for such a time as this. God can bring people into each of our lives at particular moments for a reason. God can put each of us in certain places at times for a certain reason also. It can be kind of amazing, actually, when we get a chance to see God's timing at work. So, it's well worth asking ourselves and each other Mordecai's question periodically in our lives. Who knows? Perhaps you, perhaps me, and a host of other people have come into the kingdom for such a time as this. And remember that Mordecai's question to Esther also carried with it a call and a challenge. Esther was asked to play an important part in God's plan for the Jewish people. She had been put in that place at that time because God had a job for her to do. She had to step up to the plate and get to work. If we wonder whether we are being called for such a time as this, perhaps the prior question is, what time is it then? Well, in 2020, we live in a nation that is being ripped apart by deep political divisions and incredibly charged racial tension. We live in an age in which violent acts of terrorism are happening around the globe with such frequency, we don't have time to process it until the next one hits us, and the next, and the next. And on top of all of that, we now live in a world in which there are riots in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Ohio, Dallas, Fort Worth, Iowa, Denver, Detroit, District of Columbia, Houston, Kentucky, Memphis, Minneapolis, New York City, Phoenix, Oregon, California, Washington, and Virginia, and the list could go on. To me, this is so sad and it's so disturbing. That's the number of states and cities and more which have rioting, looting, and killing going on. And just think about the human suffering. And Mordecai's words. How can we keep silent at such a time as this? When I ask God personally, what time is it, God? I hear the answer loudly and clearly. He says, Wayne, and he probably says to you too if you ask that question, it's showtime, people of God. It's time for us to get to work. Perhaps we have been brought into God's kingdom into Christ's church, perhaps we have been training to be Jesus' hands and feet and eyes in the world for just such a time as this. How do we get to work then? Well, you start with you. Make that decision. Next, your church congregation must make that decision. Next, local towns and cities must make that decision. Certainly we can do something. All Americans are capable of civil conversation and doing something to help with this mess we find ourselves in. Listen, and I will have to explain one of these words to you. God didn't place you where you are so you could eat figs all day long or post pictures of yourself on social media. Now let me explain the word fig. I don't mean like the fruit that you eat. Fig means you have no concern whatsoever what's going on about you or the world around you. And I've been thinking, with the chaos in the political arena, the chaos in our states and cities and towns, the chaos of the pandemic, the transitioning of pastors, church members moving in and out of the area in which you live, people in the congregation who've been sick, friends who've been grieving, and so on, and there are plenty more reasons to continue holding church members, family and friends, our government and our nation in our prayers. The family of God, folks, is international in scope, living on every continent, speaking thousands of languages, worshiping God in many different ways. At our best, we remember that God loves each of His children equally, and each one is worthy of His love and our prayers too. Watch for where God might be placing you for His purpose. Because let's face it, in the state our world is in right now, God's got work for all of us to do. Elementary, middle school, and high school students, 20 and 30-somethings, middle-aged folks, and senior citizens alike. Keep your eyes peeled and listen for your place to lend a hand, your opportunity to live out your identity as a faithful follower of Jesus Christ, and really to make a real difference in this world. Because who knows? God may have called you into God's kingdom for such a time as this. To miss your kingdom assignment, folks, because you have become too caught up in your personal kingdom, is the greatest tragedy any of us could ever face. Are you facing a situation that requires full trust in the Lord as you step out in the faithful obedience to Him? If so, let me pray for you. Almighty and everlasting God, I ask that you bless each person who is watching this video, that you help them in their situations, whether it be financial, whether it be economically, whether it be sickness. Bless them. And may they ask the question, what time is it? The time is now for all of us to do something, because all of us have been placed on this earth for a purpose, for such a time as this. God bless you. I hope you watch the video, and if you like it, give me a thumbs up and subscribe. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and I don't get any money for it. God bless you. Until next time. Bye.